Elvis was halfway through, Can't Help Falling in Love, when he grabbed the microphone stand with both hands and went completely still. The 8,000 people packed into the Omni Coliseum in Atlanta didn't notice at first. They were singing along, swaying, lost in the moment. But Charlie Hodge, his backup singer standing 3 feet away, saw Elvis's face go white, saw his knuckles turn bone-colored as he gripped that stand like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Then Elvis turned his head slightly, just enough so the microphone wouldn't pick it up, and whispered 5 words that made Charlie's blood run cold. "I can't feel my legs." It was August 30th, 1974, a Thursday night. The air inside the Coliseum was thick with cigarette smoke and the sweet smell of perfume and sweat. Elvis was 39 years old and in the middle of a grueling tour schedule that had him performing nearly every night for 3 months straight. He was exhausted. Everyone could see that. But exhaustion was part of the job. You pushed through. You performed. That's what professionals did. What nobody in that audience knew, what nobody in Elvis's inner circle understood, was that Elvis Presley had been performing through something far worse than exhaustion for the past 11 years. Something so painful that most men would have been bedridden. Something he'd hidden from everyone. His manager, his band, even the women he loved, because admitting it would mean admitting weakness. And Elvis Presley couldn't afford to be weak. The band kept playing. The audience kept singing. And Elvis, using every ounce of willpower he had left, finished the song. His voice never wavered. His smile never faded. When he hit that final note, "I can't help falling in love with you," 8,000 people erupted in applause, completely unaware that they just witnessed a man performing while his body was shutting down. The moment the curtain fell, Elvis collapsed. Charlie and Red West, one of Elvis's bodyguards, caught him before he hit the floor. His eyes were open but unfocused. His breathing was shallow and rapid. His skin was gray. "Get him to the dressing room," Red hissed to Charlie. "Don't let anyone see." They half-carried, half-dragged Elvis off stage. His legs weren't working. They moved like dead weight, dragging behind him as Charlie and Red struggled to keep him upright. By the time they got him to the dressing room and laid him on the couch, Elvis was barely conscious. "Call a doctor," Charlie said. "No," Elvis mumbled. "No doctors. Just give me a minute." But Red West had already seen enough. He'd been with Elvis since high school. He'd watched Elvis go from a skinny kid with a guitar to the biggest star in the world. And he'd watched, over the past few years, as something inside Elvis started breaking. The weight gain, the bizarre mood swings, the pills. So many pills. Red had assumed it was the pressure, the fame, the colonel working him to death. But this was different. Red picked up the phone and called Dr. George Nichopoulos. Dr. Nick, as everyone called him. Elvis's personal physician who'd been traveling with the tour. "We need you at the Coliseum now." Elvis collapsed. Dr. Nick arrived within minutes. He took one look at Elvis lying on that couch, his face twisted in pain even though he was barely conscious, and made a decision. "We're taking him to the hospital." Elvis tried to protest, but he couldn't form the words. Within 20 minutes, they had him in the back of an ambulance, driving through Atlanta's night traffic toward Baptist Memorial Hospital. The paramedics kept asking what happened, what he'd taken, how much he'd had to drink. Dr. Nick didn't answer. He just kept checking Elvis's vitals and praying they'd make it in time. At 11:47 p.m., Elvis Presley was wheeled into the emergency room at Baptist Memorial. The head nurse on duty, a woman named Margaret Hayes, had worked in emergency medicine for 15 years. She'd seen everything: car accidents, heart attacks, overdoses. But she'd never seen Elvis Presley on a gurney, barely conscious, his famous face contorted in agony. "What's his condition?" Margaret asked Dr. Nick. "Just get him into a room. Private. No press." They moved Elvis into a private examination room. Margaret started setting up in 4 while Dr. Nick began his examination. That's when Elvis, fighting through the fog of pain and exhaustion, grabbed Dr. Nick's wrist. "Don't tell them," Elvis whispered. "Don't tell anyone. Promise me." "Elvis, I need to know what's wrong." You already know. You've known. Just don't tell them. Margaret looked at Dr. Nick, confused. But Dr. Nick's face had gone very still. Very serious. He nodded slowly at Elvis. I won't tell them, but we need x-rays. Now. They wheeled Elvis down to radiology. Margaret accompanied them, still not understanding what was happening. The x-ray technician set up the machine, positioned Elvis carefully, though every movement made him wince, and took a series of images. Spine, pelvis, lower back. 20 minutes later, Margaret was standing in the radiology reading room with Dr. Nick and the hospital's chief of orthopedics, Dr. Samuel Morrison, looking at Elvis Presley's x-rays on the lightboard. What she saw made her hand cover her mouth. How is he even standing? Dr. Morrison said quietly. Dr. Nick didn't answer. He just stared at those x-rays with an expression Margaret couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe, or guilt. Margaret had seen degenerative disc disease before. She'd seen herniated discs. She'd seen spinal injuries from car accidents and falls. But she had never, in 15 years of nursing, seen anything like this. Elvis's lower spine looked like it belonged to a man twice his age. Multiple vertebrae showed signs of severe degeneration. 2 discs were completely herniated, pressing against nerve roots. The damage was so extensive that Margaret couldn't understand how Elvis could walk, much less perform 2-hour concerts night after night. When did this start? Margaret asked. Dr. Nick looked at her. 1963, filming It Happened at the World's Fair. He was doing his own stunts, trying to prove he was still tough, still physical. He fell wrong, compressed his spine. The damage was immediate, but the degeneration, that's been happening slowly for 11 years. And he's been performing through this? Every night, sometimes twice a night. He won't cancel shows, won't take time off. The colonel, that's his manager, won't let him. Says it'll ruin his career if people think he's weak or unreliable. Margaret looked back at the x-rays, at the clear evidence of chronic, excruciating pain. What about surgery? He refuses. Says he can't afford to be laid up for months. Says the pills manage it well enough. The pills, Margaret said slowly, understanding dawning. Everyone thinks he's an addict. He is an addict, Dr. Nick said quietly, but not the way people think. He's not taking pills to get high. He's taking them to survive. Without the painkillers, the muscle relaxants, the anti-inflammatories, he literally couldn't stand up. The pain would be unbearable. Dr. Morrison shook his head. This explains everything. The weight gain, he can't exercise properly because of the pain. The mobility issues. The mood swings, constant pain does that to a person. And performing through this, he trailed off, looking at Dr. Nick. You need to make him stop. This is going to kill him. I've tried. Elvis doesn't stop. It's not in his nature. They kept Elvis in the hospital for 3 days. Told the press it was exhaustion and dehydration. Ran more tests. Adjusted his medication. And on the 3rd day, Elvis checked himself out against medical advice and flew to his next concert date in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Margaret Hayes never forgot those x-rays. She'd go home that night and tell her husband, I saw Elvis Presley today. Everyone thinks he's destroying himself with drugs and excess. But the truth is so much sadder. He's a man in constant pain, trying desperately not to show weakness, taking pills just to survive. And nobody knows. The whole world judges him, and nobody knows. She wanted to tell people, wanted to explain, but she'd signed confidentiality agreements. And Elvis had looked at her, that last day before he left the hospital, and said, Thank you for not treating me like I'm crazy, for understanding. She couldn't betray that trust. For the next 3 years, Elvis continued performing. The pain got worse. The medication got stronger. His body got weaker, but he never stopped, never canceled a show unless he physically couldn't stand, because stopping meant admitting he couldn't do it anymore. And Elvis Presley's entire identity was built on doing things nobody thought he could do. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley died at Graceland. The official cause was cardiac arrest. But everyone who knew the real story, Dr. Nick, Margaret Hayes, the few people who'd seen those x-rays, understood the truth. Elvis's heart gave out because his body had been fighting a losing battle for 14 years. The pills that everyone blamed for his death were the only reason he'd survived as long as he did. Margaret Hayes kept her promise. She never spoke about what she'd seen that night in 1974. Not to reporters. Not to biographers. Not to the tabloids that offered her thousands of dollars for her story. But in 2014, 40 years after that night, Margaret's daughter was cleaning out her mother's belongings after Margaret passed away. She found a journal, a private diary Margaret had kept for decades. And in an entry dated August 31st, 1974, Margaret had written, "Treated Elvis Presley tonight. Saw his x-rays. Now I understand. He's not self-destructive. He's not weak. He's one of the bravest men I've ever seen. To perform through that level of pain, to smile and sing and move like nothing's wrong. That takes more courage than I can imagine. The world thinks he's falling apart. The truth is he's been holding himself together with nothing but willpower and pills, trying not to disappoint people. I wish I could tell everyone. I wish they knew. Elvis Presley isn't a tragedy of excess. He's a tragedy of pride and dedication and refusing to be anything less than perfect, even when his body was begging him to stop." Margaret's daughter, with permission from the Presley estate, eventually shared that journal entry. It was published in a medical journal article about chronic pain management in performers. And slowly, the story began to change. People started understanding that Elvis's final years weren't about addiction in the traditional sense. They were about a man managing unbearable chronic pain in an era before modern pain management techniques. A man who'd been injured doing his job and then pressured to keep working anyway because his entire industry, from his manager to the promoters to the millions of fans, needed him to be Elvis Presley, the invincible king of rock and roll. Today, chronic pain specialists use Elvis's story as a teaching example about how pain can be invisible, how people self-medicate not for recreation but for survival, how the pressure to perform, to never show weakness, can literally kill someone. And they use Margaret Hayes's journal entry as a reminder that sometimes the people we judge most harshly are fighting battles we can't see. That strength isn't always loud and obvious. Sometimes it's quiet and desperate. Sometimes it's a man whispering, "I can't feel my legs," and then finishing his song anyway because disappointing 8,000 people is worse than collapsing on stage. Elvis Presley performed 1,684 concerts in his career. And after seeing those x-rays, after understanding what he was fighting through, that number becomes even more remarkable. Because every single one of those performances, especially those final years, represented a small victory over pain that would have destroyed most people. The world wanted Elvis to be superhuman. And he tried. God, he tried. Even when his body was breaking. Even when the pills were the only thing keeping him standing. Even when whispering, "I can't feel my legs," to his backup singer because he literally couldn't feel them anymore. That's not the story of a man destroying himself. That's the story of a man who refused to stop until his body gave him no choice. If this story changed how you see Elvis Presley's final years, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this with someone who needs to understand that strength looks different for everyone, and sometimes the people struggling the most are working the hardest to hide it. Leave a comment about how this changed your perspective on Elvis's legacy. And ring that notification bell for more untold stories about the real human beings behind the legends.